Welcome to the Woodridge Baptist Church podcast. For more information about what's happening in the life of our church, visit our website at www.woodridge.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Well, good morning, friends. How are you doing out there? Y'all good? It's good to see you again. I missed you this last month. The personnel committee gave me a sabbatical. I'd never had one of those before after 28 years of ministry. I was like, what are you going to do? I was like, I don't know. I've never done it before. I don't have any idea. But it was intended to be a time of prayer and preparation, but also just kind of refreshing and renewal. And I got that and wanted to say thank you to Greg Wallace, my buddy back here, who covered for me the first week, and then Hugh Poland and Ed Hancock. And then last week, Brandon Reed. I left you in very able hands. I think they did a great job because I listened. But it also gave me a chance to visit some other sister churches and to worship with churches that are just doing good things. And so thank you for giving me the time. Now, before I left, we were in the study of Mark's gospel, and we have some unfinished business. We're going to pick up where we left off. And we're in Mark chapter 15. We'll start in verse 16. This is one of those passages that I have never felt that I was the person that should preach it. I just never have. Because today we're looking into the crucifixion of Jesus, and I'm one of the reasons he's crucified. And so I've always felt just kind of deep in myself that when I get to this, I was like, somebody else should talk about this. But then I go, well, who else is going to talk about it? I would hand it off to somebody that sins like I do, just teach it. And so that's what we're going to do. Let's see what God wants to show us today. In Mark chapter 15, verse 16, this is the way it begins. It says, the soldiers led him away into the palace, that is the governor's residence, and called the whole company together. And they dressed him in a purple robe, twisted together a crown of thorns, and they put it on him. And they began to salute him. Hail, the King of the Jews. And they were hitting him on the head with a stick. They were spitting on him. Getting down on their knees, they were paying him homage. And after they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple robe and they put clothes on him. When you look at this beginning of this passage in Mark chapter 15, the robe that they describe, it's a short robe. It literally would kind of come to the elbows with a tie or a button at the neck. But the way that this robe was designed for people that they would put it on, which wasn't many, they were mocking him for a specific reason. Literally, he would be naked from the waist down. And Jesus would be walking like this through people. He's a public spectacle. I mean, the mockery was intentional. They wanted him to be as ashamed as he could possibly be. And when they put the crown of thorns, you got to understand what that looked like. Each thorn, if you've ever been to Israel, they still have these things today. It grows on a vine, and the vine is very malleable. You can twist this thing around. But a single thorn could be upwards of 3 to 3.5 inches in length. That's one of them. And as they would wind this thing around, we kind of have this picture that the crown of thorns just looked like something that wrapped around the head like this. You know what I'm talking about? But really, the way the crown of thorns would be shaped is almost like a helmet. And they would put it down on the head, and then they would shove it down through the skull. So if what you can picture in this moment is something like that, you're getting a little bit closer to what Jesus went through. It's quite a lot. But you also have to remember, he's already been through the scourge. He had already been beaten with the cat of nine tails. And when you think about the suffering that happened from the cat of nine tails, I mean, the Jews had a limit on the number of hits that a person they would give. And that's because there was a restriction in the law. In Deuteronomy 25, you could hit someone with the cat of nine tails upwards of 40 times. Just to be safe, they numbered it at 39 times so that they wouldn't violate the law. But the Romans had no limit on the number of times they could hit somebody with the cat of nine tails. And so typically what they would do is they would chain someone, whoever they were beating, they would chain them to a post so that they couldn't get away. And they would start by beating them over their chest and then flip them over and beat them over their back. The cat of nine tails, just so you know, it had a number of things in it, like shards of metal and bone and other things. And it was meant to inflict as much damage as it possibly could with the person that they were hitting. Not unusual for a person that was beaten with the cat of nine tails to die from that. Largely because by the time that they were done, your ribs would be exposed and other bones would be exposed. And just the sheer amount of bleeding that the person went through. Jesus has already been through all of that before this moment. And so what they did, as Mark goes on, it says they led him out to crucify him. And they forced a man coming in from the country who was passing by to carry Jesus' cross. He was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Now, you've got to imagine at this point, Jesus is pretty weak. Is that fair? I mean, how would you be feeling? Probably not great. The historian Plutarch, he said, victims of crucifixion had to carry the crossbeam of their own cross, chained to them with a board hung around their neck about 2 feet wide, detailing a person's crime that would be nailed to the cross so that the passerby would know why they were being executed. It was basically a way of Rome saying, do this and this is what happens to you too. So it was meant to not just shame them, but to stop you. Now, I like this. He mentioned Simon of Cyrene. He's probably coming into the area because this is a holy season back then. You've had Passover and other things that are happening. Maybe he's coming in like that. But then he mentions his sons. And I was like, well, why mention those guys? And it kind of hit me. It's probably an ancient way of putting a footnote into the story in Mark's gospel. It's saying something like this. Hey, these people are still alive. And so if you want to go talk to them about what they saw, go and talk to them. Here's their names. He just kind of includes that in. It's not just a story. This is what happened. So as Mark goes on, he says, they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. And they tried to give him wine mixed with myrrh, but he didn't take it. Now, just so you understand, what they're offering him here is basically like a narcotic. You can imagine after the cat of nine tails, and you can imagine what he's enduring right now. This is a lot of suffering. Is that fair? Now, how many of you would say, oh, you're offering me a narcotic, I think I'll take it? Anybody? Because not only would I take one, I'd say, do you have a second? Jesus has been through a lot. But did you notice Jesus doesn't take it? Like he fully experiences the suffering in the moment. I wondered why. I'm not exactly sure. Some New Testament scholars think it might be because of this. When you go back, when Jesus has the guys in the upper room, and before he's handed over to be put on trial, he institutes communion. And as he institutes communion, he takes it with the guys, the disciples in the upper room. You remember what he says, I won't drink of this cup. I won't drink of this cup again until the kingdom comes. Well, maybe it was something like that. I'm not drinking this cup. It's not time for that. So what happens in verse 24, then they crucified him and they divided his clothes, casting lots for them to decide what each one would get. Now, it was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. And the inscription of the charge written against him was the King of the Jews, obviously making fun of him. And they crucified 2 criminals with him, one on his right and one on his left. Now, historians have had a lot to say about what anyone that experienced crucifixion went through. Cicero said that it was the most cruel and shameful of any punishment that you could have gone through in the ancient Near East. And just so you know, the Romans weren't the ones that came up with it. The Persians had been practicing crucifixion for hundreds of years at this point. The Romans were the ones that perfected it. They're the ones that had it down to an art form. But questions kind of cropped up. It's like, why are you raising? You could crucify somebody and just leave them on the ground, right? Why raise them up and hang them like that? And the answer is it actually goes back to the Persians. The Persians worshiped a god called Ormuzd, who was the god of the earth. And what they believed is if you raised them up off of the ground, then the blood wouldn't hit the ground and thus contaminate the ground of the god that they worshiped. That's where the practice actually came from. But of the act itself, what a person would have experienced as they were crucified, I wanted to share something with you from James Bishop. He said, this is what it would have been like for Jesus. The executioner laid the crossbeam behind Jesus and brought him to the ground quickly by grasping his arm and pulling him backwards. As soon as Jesus fell, the beam was fitted under the back of his neck, And on each side, soldiers quickly knelt on the inside of the elbows. Now, once begun, the matter was done quickly and efficiently. The executioner wore an apron with pockets. He would place the nails between his teeth, and a hammer in hand would kneel beside the right arm. The soldier whose knee rested on the inside of the elbow held the forearm flat to the board. That was his job, hold them steady. And with the right hand, the executioner would probe the wrist of Jesus to find the hollow spot. That is where there would be no artery and there would be no vein. And when he found it, he would take one of the square-cut iron nails from his teeth and he would hold it against that spot, probably between these two bones in your arm. He then raised the hammer over the nail head and he would bring it down with force. And then the executioner would go to the other side of the body and to the other wrist. As soon as he was satisfied that the condemned man could not, in struggling, pull himself loose and perhaps fall forward off of the cross, literally it needed to hold their body weight, he brought both of his arms upward rapidly, and this was to signal it's time to lift the crossbeam. And so two soldiers grabbed each side of the crossbeam and they lifted, and as they pulled, they would drag Jesus by his wrists. And when the soldiers reached the upright, the four of them began to lift the crossbeam higher and higher until the feet of Jesus were off of the ground. When the crossbeam was set firmly, the executioner would reach up, set the board which listed the name of the prisoner and the crime, and then he knelt before the cross. Two soldiers hurried to help. Each one took a leg and a calf. The ritual was to nail the right foot over the left foot. This was probably the most difficult part because you're going through multiple bones, through multiple legs. And if the feet were pulled downward and nailed close to the foot of the cross, the prisoner, they always died very quickly. And so over the years, the Romans learned to push the feet upward on the cross so that the condemned man could lean on the nails so as to stretch himself upward. And so with his arms in a V position, which obviously would cause just like intense muscle cramping, can you imagine the pain that he's going through? But you got to keep breathing. And as you would kind of droop down, it would cut your air off. And so what Jesus would do as he was hanging on the cross is he would push up off of the nail that went through both of his legs, and he would pull himself up by the nails that were through his wrists so that he could get some air. But you can only hold yourself so long, and then you would slump back down. And you would do this over and over again until you couldn't anymore. And then after that, you're just not going to breathe. The way that Mark describes it says, after hanging on the cross for 6 hours, Jesus took his last breath. Chuck Swindoll, kind of the famous pastor, he said, let's take a long look at him. He's come a long way from Bethlehem's manger, from a wooden trough to a wooden cross. He has come a long way. But it's not the end of the story, because as Mark goes on to say, those who passed by, they were yelling insults at him. They were shaking their heads. They were saying, ha, the one who would destroy the temple and rebuild in 3 days. Save yourself by coming down from the cross. Of course, he's not on the cross to save himself. That's not why he's even there. And in the same way, the chief priests and the scribes, they were mocking him among themselves and saying, well, he saved others, but he can't save himself. Well, he could. It's just not why he's on the cross. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross so that we may see and believe. Even those who crucified were taunting him. I want to remind us of something this morning, and the thing I want us to remind us of is the reason for the cross. And yeah, we are part of the reason. Even as we sang this morning from Isaiah 53, he was wounded for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace. And with his stripes, we are healed. We just sang that together. We just did. But it reminded me of something. Going back into seminary, there was a book that I had to read. And the book was written in 1973 by a guy named Carl Menninger. I'm doing some quick math in my head, but I think that hits around something like 52 years ago, give or take, something like that. But he wrote a book called Whatever Became of Sin. And I want you to think about something that he said here because it's kind of interesting. What Menninger predicted in this book is that the term sin would be replaced with words like this: illness, disorder, dysfunction, syndrome. And he said the human condition would be excused as a product of biochemistry, environment, experience, and trauma. He even projected that crime would go unpunished, as criminal activity would be justified and minimized as the result of some medical abnormality for which one could not be held responsible. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Because honestly, I think we're living this on steroids right now. What do you think? But that wasn't it. Because what he went on to say was this. He said everyone would be innocent because everybody would be vindicated through biology and psychiatry. There's always a reason. There's always a just so. And so what he went on to say was this. He said, when no one is responsible, then no one is guilty. And so what happened is therapy replaced worship. Therapy replaces worship. Because really, at the end of the day, nobody has a sin problem. But what is interesting about Menninger, when he wrote the book, this was his idea. He said, we need a revival of the concept of sin. This is 1973, everybody. We need a revival of the concept of sin. Oh, by the way, cat out of the bag, he's not a Christian. He said, we need to reclaim this. He said, because if there's nothing wrong, then there's nothing to forgive. But something is wrong, and we do need forgiveness. On my sabbatical, one of the things that I did was Wendy and I went up to Nashville so that we could see Coldplay in concert. It was probably not the most spiritual thing we did, but y'all are fine. All right, so we go up to Nashville. Now, here's the crazy thing. Right before we go up to Nashville, they had done another concert, which was just outside of Boston, Massachusetts. Do y'all know where I'm going with this? Yeah? Well, I'll go there anyway. We're going to do it. Yeah, how many of you remember this moment? Can I see your hands there? Hey, I also want to say just in advance, thank you to all the church members that texted me in advance of my going to Nashville saying something like this: I really hope you enjoy Coldplay. Please don't get caught on the Jumbotron with your arms around another woman. Like, please. And if it is a woman, please let it be Wendy, please. Like, thank you. We'll give it the old college try. See, here's the thing. Here's what you know. Everybody knows this moment because it went viral, and it went viral, I mean like that. Now, let me ask you this question. How many of you would like to be the one in the picture up here? And I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't. But I do want to make an important point here because this guy's name is Andy Byron. He was the CEO of Astronomer. The woman that is with him is not his wife. She was the head of HR for Astronomer. When I read the story, I was like, you can't make this up. I mean, does she walk in and go, I hereby fire myself? Whatever. Here was the thing. This is what came out in the news. One report said this. He plans to sue Coldplay as well as the people that represent Coldplay that put on the concert venue. Plans to sue all of them. I don't know if he's going to do it, but this is what the report said. Because, to quote the report, he did not consent to be filmed, and he believes the viral moment publicly humiliated him and made him a meme. Well, it did publicly humiliate him, and he did become a meme. But there's more, because this is what he said, his words, quote, a song cost me my family, my job, and everything I built. Now, I want to be fair. When Wendy and I were at the concert, before we got to that part of the concert, Chris Martin, lead singer of Coldplay, said, we would like to greet some of the people that are out in the crowd today. Now, this event had happened just a few days before we were in Nashville with Coldplay. And he said, I want to give you all a few minutes. Ladies, maybe if you want to do your hair, or for some of you, if you just want to step out for a little while, that's perfectly fine. Here's the thing. Remember the quote, a song cost me my family, my job, and everything I built. No, it didn't. Your adultery cost you everything that you built. So why the cross? Like, why the cross? And the answer is because sin is real. That's the why. The cross addresses the consequences of sin. We need more than just forgiveness. We need that. But we need more. We need someone to address the consequences of sin. Scripture says the wages of sin is death. That's the consequence of it. And what Jesus does in his death is in the cross, he goes through death. In his resurrection, he's raised to life. It's like he throws a line through death and says, grab a hold. I can pull you through this. I can pull you through this. This is what he's trying to say. But it won't work if we continue to buy the line that sin isn't real. And this is coming from a person that believes in counselors, believes that trauma is real. But we have to get to the rest of the story. These things cannot be an excuse for why we make the choices that we do. And therefore, there's no accountability for the choices that we make. We need a revival of sin. Menninger was right. We need a revival of sin. But I want you to see what the cross does. It saves. But that said, it's bad news before it's good news. It's bad news before it's good news. You have to say you're sick before you go to the doctor. You have to say you're a sinner before you call out to a Savior. It's bad news before it's good news. I want you to think about this, friends. In the biblical imagination, death is a sign of living outside of Eden. It's what it's a sign of. When you go into Genesis 3 and you have the original rebellion from Adam and Eve, it says they were cast out of Eden. Well, they weren't thrown to Mars. But what they were is they were cast out of the place that was the daily dwelling place and meeting place between them and God. It's like, that's great, you're not fit for this space, but there is a space for you. And what that meant was death had a rightful claim on them. And everybody's been living in that space ever since. It's not just that Adam and Eve went out, they took everybody out with them. Every kid that is born went out with them. And as a result, you know what it says, like in Romans says, subjected creation to futility. And we've been living in it ever since. But when we see the problem for what it really is, we can see a solution for what it can be. I love what Tim Mackey says. He says, I want you to picture this. A firefighter breaks through the door of a home that's on fire. And there's this beam that's collapsing. And he's holding up the beam and telling the trapped people that are inside, run out. Run out. And then they're all running out of the place. And then boom, everything collapses in and kills the firefighter. That's a picture of what saving is about. We get saved from danger. Or even as John 3:16 says, we get saved from ruin. I want you to hear these words from Paul in Colossians 1:9-14. He said, for this reason also, since the day we heard this, we haven't stopped praying for you. We're asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will and all wisdom and spiritual understanding so that you may walk worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, bearing fruit in every good work and growing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, so that you may have great endurance and patience, joyfully giving thanks to the Father who has enabled you to share in the saints' inheritance in the light. But then he says this, he has rescued us from the domain of darkness, transferred us into the kingdom of the Son he loves. In him we have redemption and the forgiveness of sins. We can have that. And for some of us, we have that. Sometimes we just forget the cost. From darkness to light and from death to life. Do you see what Jesus does? Do you see what he did? Do you see what he did? He goes through death, raises up, and he throws a line through the other side. He says, I'm the one that can get you through this. Otherwise, you're choosing to be on your own. Choosing to be on your own. Can I encourage you this morning to take the rope? It wasn't free. It was incredibly costly.
We hope you have enjoyed the podcast. For more information about our church, visit www.woodridge.org.